Okay, we might kick things off. So good morning, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Neil Walsh. I'm the Director of Housing for Civica, and on behalf of AHURI, the National Housing Conference, and of course Civica, I'd like to welcome you to today's last session of the think tank. So thank you for those that have joined for earlier sessions, and I'm sure this one's going to be as great as the other two earlier in the conference. But before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on where we meet today and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders that may be joining us for today's session. So a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this session and there is online streaming as well. So there will be Q&A after each of the sessions. We'll have some roaming microphones for you, so if you could wait for the microphone before you ask the question so we capture that on the recording. Now, before I also introduce today's presentation, I'd like to also acknowledge the people who have lived experience of housing vulnerability, who are at this conference, either as presenters or delegates. Your voices are important in the shaping of better housing outcomes for the future, so thank you. Now, today's think tank session, repurposing property. Whoops, let me on my first page. That's it, isn't it? Repurposing property, there you go. Usually they're a little bit longer, so I apologise for that. So the first presentation is from Dan Cox and Ben Moore. Dan is the Executive Manager of Community Services at UnitingSA. His portfolio incorporates community and mental health programs, homelessness, NDIS, supported employment and training, family and youth services. He also represents UnitingSA as the lead agency on the Adelaide North West Homeless Alliance. With significant public sector experience in health and community services and a long career in management consulting, Dan is committed to influencing public policy in the interest of improving homelessness services and promoting wellbeing more broadly. Ben Moore commenced his role overseeing property and housing at UnitingSA in December 2019. He has over 20 years' experience in the community services sector and was previously head of housing at Anglicare. Ben holds an essential role in growing UnitingSA's housing portfolio, as well as leading our major property and aged care developments. So with that, I'd like to welcome Dan and Ben to the stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil, and welcome everyone. Well done the day after the night before, for those who enjoyed the night before. Thanks for the welcome, Neil. I guess the reason that there's two of us today is because, as Neil described, I oversee the services of UnitingSA that include our homelessness services, and Ben oversees our property and housing portfolio. And in some respects, I think this project is a representation of problem identification and a bit of idea generation on my part of the business, and the solution and getting things done part being the action that Ben's part of the business was able to pursue. A little bit about UnitingSA, and really just because it gives a bit of a context of UnitingSA being a relatively large not-for-profit organisation, and it does have a lot of elements to it. But one of the things I'd like to focus on in this presentation is that some of the ideas, and I think this is an example of it, some of the ideas don't have to be particularly big in order to be significant. So although we have a very large client base, we have a lot of staff, and we have relatively high turnover for a South Australian not-for-profit, and a growing number of houses, there was an opportunity for us in the project we'll be discussing today to do something on a relatively small scale, and to think about how we can make the most of what we've got, which was the working title for my presentation before it was poo-pooed. And really, I think it's an opportunity, if I could ask everyone today to have the takeaways in mind about, allowing yourselves to think about what's possible not necessarily thinking about opportunities only being those that are presented to us, but thinking about ways in which we can be proactive, have a go at innovation, and sometimes throw enough mud at the wall and see how much sticks. So we are a large organisation, we are fairly diverse, and as Neil said, we're also part of an alliance of homelessness services across northwestern Adelaide. A lot of these stats are probably no news to a lot of people who might work in the homelessness sector or have links to it, but what we've really seen over the last 12 months is a pointed increase in demand, and as we've heard a number of presenters talk about, a bit of a perfect storm. But just in our own service through the western part of Adelaide, we'd seen a 90% increase in those sleeping rough attending our homelessness service, and pretty much a doubling of those who were presenting unable to pay rent. Coupled with that, not only in our own housing portfolio but across the board, is that historically low vacancy rate in community housing and in private rental. And whilst the news in the graph on the right-hand side is not very good across Australia, that green arrow is pointing to South Australia's vacancy rate, which is even lower than the national average. What that means in South Australia is that there is an emergency accommodation program, or EAP, which offers about 200 families a night the opportunity to stay in emergency accommodation, and that is almost always hotel motel accommodation. A roof's better than no roof. But what we do have with that program is, as I say, a very high volume of use, an almost endless amount of spend and a growing amount of spend. So from around $5 million being spent in 17-18, $11 million last year, and looking a bit more like $14 million this year, just being spent on hotel accommodation for those in crisis. That program is also governed by very short approval processes. So it's maximum of 7 days is what people are approved for in that program. They have multiple points of assessment and multiple referrals to gain access to that program and to stay in it. And despite that very short time frame that people are afforded the opportunity to stay in EAP, as the bottom stat says, most people are spending more than a month in that environment. So we've got a problem where what is supposed to be a short-term emergency response is anything but. It's a very expensive one, and we've seen a cohort of people go through that program, most often families with children, and very often repeating entry into that program. As I say, a roof is better than no roof, but hotels, and I'm not sure how well the photo comes up on the bottom of that slide, but we've got a range of hotels involved in the program, none of which were built for this purpose. They're great if you're spending a night in Adelaide to go and watch the car race or go to the theatre or whatever show might be happening in Adelaide. But it's not a place to stay for over a month with 2, 3, 4 or 5 kids in tow in a room with just a couple of beds and no other facilities. So there is issues with overcrowding. Those sites are not fit for purpose. They don't have on-site support really by the hotel itself, nor really is it a great place for visiting services to come and work closely with those families who really need support. Pets are a big issue for people who've been displaced and need somewhere to stay. Those with children may not necessarily be anywhere near the school that their kids need to go to. It's almost impossible to have access to laundry and kitchen facilities, which then has an impact on the cost that people are paying to stay fed and clothed and so on. A lot of families have been involved or are escaping violence and the security of those kind of facilities. This one is on a very main road in Adelaide, a major thoroughfare, not great either for security or for allowing the kids to go outside to play. So a lot of problems in that emergency accommodation program at the moment. So all of that, I guess, gave us the opportunity to think about how we might be able to offer something that's different. And looking around some of the sites that we were using for a variety of purposes, we had a really close look at a site that we'd been renting from the SA Housing Authority, really as an office space. So it's not probably particularly easy, but on the right-hand side, there's a larger building with a terracotta coloured roof. We've been using that building as an office for our mental health services for a number of years. But sprinkled around the site, if you can see on the left-hand side of that dwelling, are a number of outbuildings which had been used for a variety of purposes over a number of years, starting off life as youth accommodation, but then gradually being converted into offices over time, and effectively coming to end of life and not being used for the last few years. So having had a look at that site and recognising its potential, we approached government to see if there was a way we could use those outbuildings as a way to reconvert into accommodation. They were in a pretty average state. They had not been used for living purposes for a long time, and their life as office accommodation was pretty much over as well. So in approaching government, we went to government with the following kind of proposal in mind, to say, we've got the bricks and mortar, we've got the space, and we've got the opportunity to offer people something that's quite different. So we approached government to suggest that we could convert 8 of those outbuildings into fully furnished units, to make them 2-bedroom, and to address some of the other problems with that emergency accommodation program, like a bit of security of tenure, like the opportunity to obtain a rental history and potentially have rental references available, to allow kids to play outside, to be able to cook and clean and wash your own clothes without having to trek around the place, and really to try and address a number of those issues that had been identified in the EAP program. The other thing we did was reserve one of those buildings to be an on-site office for visiting staff, not only case managers from our homelessness services, but over time to add supplementary services that could be delivered on site as well. So we have parenting programs, we have financial counselling, we have connection to our mental health and other services available as well. So that was the approach, and I guess that was where my job became trying to make the proposition attractive and then give it to Ben and his guys to make the work happen. So I'll hand over to Ben.
Thanks, Dan. As Dan said, obviously we're a community housing provider. At the same time, so in terms of the energy and the enthusiasm for us to get involved with this project from the start was fantastic. What we were able to do as a community housing provider, which one is it? Just the big green one. Okay. Is we have a can-do attitude. We are trying to live our values. We're trying to move as quickly as we possibly can in order to find solutions. So, that idea, that pitch, is an easy sell to our team in order to get involved, and then to be able to, liaise and talk with government to get things as easily as possibly done for them. So, as a community housing provider, we had access to trade, so we were able to get our builders. Sometimes, with the government processes and things like that, there's a procurement, because we've already got lots of people on our books, we're able to repurpose this property quite quickly. I think originally we were given a 6-month time frame, so, trying to create 8 homes within that 6-month period is no easy task, but that was our time frame that we were given. Again, our teams were super excited, and when we started to talk to the trades and talked, about the whole, process of repurposing, it was, they're coming to the party and they were very excited to be involved. What we're able to do within that, again, that 6-month time frame, we're able to repurpose, so we completely gutted all 8 properties. They're not, they had existing connections of services and things like that. But within that time frame, not only were we able to deliver the 8 housing outcomes, but we're able to do it within a 3-month period. So for 300,000, we created the 8 properties, taken them from this sort of shell into that. So just in terms of being able to look at the before and the after. Again, they're quite modest, they're quite simple, but it was fantastic to be able to get involved, be able to deliver it within 3 months, and then obviously start to accommodate from there.
So I guess with projects like this, some of the devil's in the detail, and replicability is something that is possibly a question on some people's minds. We were quite deliberately opportunistic with this project, so we not only tried to make a compelling case to government about it just being a good idea straight up, but we're also able to offer the government opportunity to apply underspend funding that had been accrued over a year to put in the bucket for that works. That made the capital outlay even smaller. It was already committed funding. We weren't asking government to put its hand in its pocket. We're also able to make a reasonably... we're also able to make a reasonably compelling case about the potential financial and economic return on investment that this kind of model could apply. And as I'm about to show a video, the client experience is really probably the thing we're most proud of, offering an opportunity that is much different to the existing program. So we've got a bit of a video which captures one person's experience in the living in Pepper Tree Place.
We stayed in a motel for 3 months. I was happy to have somewhere to go, but it was dark and dingy and you could hear through the walls. Sometimes it got a bit scary, hearing the yelling. 99% of the people that I met at the motel were women with children.
We are in a housing crisis. Emergency motel accommodation is becoming the normal response to people experiencing homelessness. That sense of safety and security is so important for us to move on and stabilise, and motel accommodation often does not provide that. That presents a lot of anxiety and worry for some of our parents.
The Adelaide Northwest Homelessness Alliance has come together to think about alternatives to emergency hotel accommodation. We're working on the short term, the medium term and the long term solutions because we know that this is an unprecedented crisis and we need to put everything that we've got at it.
We knew there had to be a circuit breaker. Through really good work, we invested a few $100,000 and Pepper Tree Place was born.
There are 8 self-contained small homes. They each have bedrooms, living areas, kitchens.
They're just beautiful little self-contained units with our own washing machine and dining table and oven and clothesline. There's room for the children to play. It feels like you're in a little home and it's safe. It made such a difference to us. We were really grateful to be there, really grateful.
8 organisations who form the Alliance are all on site, supporting families as they take that step, rebuilding their confidence.
As part of our model at Pepper Tree Place, clients are required to pay rent. This enables them to establish a rental history. As a result of that, enables them to apply and sustain ongoing housing as they would in the normal rental market.
Initiatives like Pepper Tree Place provide huge benefits for the children, the parents, their friends and their family, but also the public reap the rewards as well of knowing that we are doing the very best we can to support a group of people who have been treated terribly. We are doing a much better job investing the public dollar into outcomes that are sustainable, long-lasting and well worth it.
Having access to safe and appropriate housing is fundamental. What families need, like any of us, is security, safety, and a sense of community. Having stable housing offers them that. It is the first step, and it's a crucial one.
Okay, so the Pepper Tree Place model has been operational since early in the year. I think February was the time that we had our first full cohort of families. And so relatively early days, but the outcomes are really positive and really encouraging. So if we think about some of those stats earlier on in the presentation, high volume of repeat entrants into the EAP program, the length of stay that people were staying anyway, to have that first cohort progress through Pepper Tree Place and have a lot of those families achieve a successful housing outcome, which is long-term and sustainable, is something that's really valuable for us. But I think just as importantly are the levels of satisfaction and well-being. So we are measuring well-being for people going through the program, and their levels of hope, optimism and sense of well-being are extremely high as well. We're also finding that people are paying their rent and they're treating the place really well. And I think the message that that gives to me is you give people something nice and they treat it nice. And often we don't, I think, as a service system. The real hook, I guess, for government, though, is that we've been able to represent really significant savings. So just in that first few months of operation, the program was able to save around about 1,000 nights of hotel accommodation that the government would be paying for, and to deliver it at about a third of the cost of what that hotel accommodation would have been. So clearly not everyone's sitting on a massive block of land with a whole bunch of outbuildings out in the backyard. This is not necessarily a replicable model for everyone to implement, but what I would like to do is leave people with some questions about the kind of opportunities that you might be either overlooking or being able to explore with partners. Is there vacant land? Is there existing buildings that either your organisation or organisations that you partner with have access to? Another project that we've recently done is, as an aged care provider, we decommissioned an old nursing home that was no longer fit for purpose. And we've since offered that to a refugee resettlement service and to a disability provider who is able to they're both using half of that site, and they're using it for people who are currently in hospital and don't need to be. I think there was a speaker talking about that yesterday. And with almost no cost to repurpose that facility. We're always on the lookout for those things. I have a bit of a thing about wanting to create tiny home villages and so on. I haven't quite nailed that yet, but it doesn't take a whole lot of land to be able to create a number of housing outcomes. I guess when coming up with those ideas, the opportunity is always, well, the challenge is always there to demonstrate to government what's in it for them. And I think when we can offer both a more positive experience for people accessing those sorts of programs and also represent some efficiency and economies, then you're on a winner. And changing existing practice is one of those things where, a simple thing like offering on-site case management in a dedicated place is one of those things that wasn't possible in the previous model, has now become possible, and it makes a really big difference to not only the staff, but also the clients of those services. So thank you. I think that's it. Are we doing questions now or after?
Yeah, well, we'll open up the questions. If you've got a question, if you just raise your hand and we'll come by with a microphone. Oh, there we go. Got a couple over here. We'll go with Rob first and then
Yeah, hi, I'm Rob Burnley from Anglicare Sydney. We've done a few examples, I guess a little bit similar. So the ones we've been doing is buying old pubs and sort of converting them into like, I suppose almost a boarding house style thing. So it's kind of a, firstly, congratulations on what you've done. That's great. I suppose I'm sort of positive and negative at the same time about it. So it is a kind of, with what we've done, it's been a great solution, helping people. But it's really expensive, I suppose. What we found is in terms of just the heritage, and you're very much constrained by what you can do and latent conditions and things like that. So I'm just wondering, it seems to have worked there, but I'm just wondering, did you have sort of technical problems in terms of trying to get the things done?
Very few, and Ben might want to add, but I think to some extent it was because of the nature of that site and the buildings that were already there. They were effectively long-term transportable dwellings that had been in situ for a long time. So the works, because it was a complete gut, the works were reasonably straightforward. And we had a builder who I think had a bit of a social conscience as well. So the builders offered us a pretty good deal. They did it quickly. They did a bit more than they were contracted to do, and so on. So we didn't really employ that as part of our approach. We just found someone who was willing to do that, possibly because they've done well out of us in other projects. But any way we can hook in some of that value add, we've tried to do.
Thank you. Lyndall Bryant from Queensland University of Technology. My question is around the planning provisions, and you can get one level of government to be cooperative, but doesn't always flow down. So just wondering how you might have dealt with any planning issues and timeframes potentially that can blow things out.
I think we dodged a few bullets, to be honest, because not only was it a SA Housing Authority property, but because those dwellings had originally been for an accommodation purpose, we didn't need to alter any planning provisions, and all of the works were internal as well. So we didn't really need building approvals through local government either. So, as I say, we got quite lucky and we managed to skate through some pretty thin lines. But I suspect what that would have done is just make the process a little bit slower. I think what we're seeing across the board is a relatively enthusiastic response from all levels of government to make a difference in this space. So I feel like we would have had success. It just maybe would have dragged the chain a bit.
Hi, Gus Taddeo from Churches of Christ here in Queensland. Well done. I loved it. And yeah, opportunistic, who cares? Sometimes it balances out all those really hard ones. Just a question on the alliance and how it works. Is there is there a business structure? So who took all the risk with the project? Was there a lead and the others were there just to provide the service, just to give an understanding on the arrangement that worked at your end? And just secondly, you spoke about ROI for government. Was it purely a comparison to emergency accommodation equals this cost per day, week, month, versus this would be a long-term saving of X, or were there other factors, social factors, etc., that the government were happy to attain a value to? Be interested to know that.
Yeah, I'll perhaps answer the second bit first. So the timing was quite interesting, given that as we were trying to get this project up and running, government was already reviewing that EAP program. I think with a reasonably clear knowledge that that program wasn't as good as it could be either. So in terms of convincing government that something different needed to be tried, that was relatively straightforward. It was somewhat difficult to estimate what the return on investment would have been from the outset, because we didn't know about things like how sustainable exits would be, how long people would in fact stay. So although we were offering 3-month leases from the outset, it was a bit of a fingers crossed about whether that would be something that would actually take place. Some of those families have indeed stayed a bit longer than 3 months. But in terms of cost savings, in effect, anyone who goes into the EAP program, they pay the first night's accommodation in that hotel, and then government effectively foots the bill after that. So every night saved is a couple of $100 that government would have been spending on a hotel room. So the maths is relatively straightforward. I don't know how robust the methodology is, but the maths is pretty straightforward on that sense. And we were keen to measure wellbeing and outcomes, and we'll hopefully have a much better sense of sustainability of those outcomes over time as well. And the first bit, the alliance bit, this was perhaps a bit more straightforward because no member of the alliance is the owner of that property, because it's a lease from government anyway, and that was a pre-existing lease. We took that project on because UnitingSA was already leasing the site, so we took on the extension of lease conditions. We took on the paying of the builders and all of that sort of thing, but a relatively low risk because we knew we had the government's backing for that.
Okay, do we have any more questions? Oh, over here. Bear with me, I'm coming.
Hi, I'm Kathy Goss from ACT Treasury. Congratulations, and I love the costs. Fantastic. I just have a financial question about the rents. Were they set at a certain rate for different people, or was it a standard rate? And would the rents be enough to cover the ongoing costs?
Do you want to talk about rent calculation? The rental costs are the same for each unit, and they are lower than market, so it's 210.
So they're based 25%, so standard social housing rent calculations. Yeah.
But it does include utilities. Yep.
Do we have any further questions?
Oh, and is it enough? Not quite. So the rent doesn't cover the operation of site and so on. So government has given a very modest operating grant for that service as well, around about 130 grand a year, I think, which helps us secure and maintain the site and offer some of those incoming services as well.
Just 2 seconds. There we go.
Thanks. I'm George from Jacaranda Housing here in Brisbane. Like, your social housing rents 25% gross income. I guess it'd be worked out at. Are you able to capture rent assistance as well on top of that, or not?
Yes, yeah, we do capture the rent assistance as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great job.
Yeah, thank you.
Do we have any further questions? Just let me check if we've got any online. Francis, do we have any online questions? No. Okay. Well, thanks Dan and Ben for sharing the Pepper Tree experience, and I guess more importantly, how you're improving the lives of those displaced in the local community. So if we can have a round of applause for Dan and Ben. Okay, I'd now like to welcome Simone Parsons to the stand. Simone is the Deputy CEO of Women's Community Shelters. Simone's a social and community housing services professional with over 25 years' experience working with not-for-profit organisations, state and local government. Women's Community Shelters is an organisation based in New South Wales, which over the last 10 years has partnered with local communities, philanthropy and government to open 8 new crisis shelters for women and children who are homeless or escaping domestic violence or family violence. She has a passion for, wait for it, working strategically and collaboratively to bring ideas and possibilities to fruition. So with that, I welcome Simone to the stage.
Thanks. Thanks so much, everybody, and extraordinary work. Lovely to follow you up. Yes, Simone Parsons, Deputy CEO in an organisation which is quite young. We're 10 years old, or hitting into our 11th year. And actually, I need to correct you on the number of services open. We've opened 10 shelters now, so primarily crisis accommodation. Well, all of those are crisis accommodation. But our operating model is one where we partner with local communities and activate community to respond in their local area to domestic and family violence and homelessness. So before I go any further, I just want to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from Aboriginal land. I'm from Durragland in Sydney. It's a real joy to be here. Pay my respects to any Aboriginal people with us and online, and hearts with you for Saturday, of course. So, repurposing property. Let me tell you a little bit about our project. Let's make sure everything's working. So, kind of at the other end of the spectrum from the presentation that you've just heard, which tells you that innovation is possible wherever you are along the continuum and wherever you have a need to address housing vulnerability. So our frame of reference is using properties for the meanwhile. So the term meanwhile use, I understand, originated out of the UK. We tend to flip it around, but you'll, by the end of this presentation, if you don't know what meanwhile is, then come and check in with me. But it's temporary use of underoccupied, underutilised vacant properties. And yes, there are other partners who are doing this, but we've certainly put a lot of energy into this in New South Wales. We operate crisis accommodation. Our model is that women stay for up to 3 months, and then the expectation is that we're able to move them into permanent housing. And when we're hitting vacancy rates of less than 1% in South Australia and just over 1% nationally, you can imagine what an incredibly hard task that is. So I'm going to talk today, yes, about property, but more critically about people, because people are the real focus of this story, I guess, and of the work that we're doing. I also want to talk about partnerships, and I want to acknowledge some of our partners that are in the room. I've got Link Wentworth, but we've also partnered with other community housing providers, including Bridge, Evolve, City West. They're all New South Wales based, some of them moving into other states and territories as well. And partnerships beyond just the community housing sector. We've partnered with philanthropy, we've partnered with developers, aged care providers. Partnerships are everything. So people, partnerships, yes, property, and the type and kind and length of time a property is available, all of those things are really key, and I'll talk about that too. I liked some of the questions earlier because planning, yes, planning is essential to understand and be prepared for. Planning is also really key because anything that is available for the meanwhile means that it gets stood up and it gets stood down. So planning for that, being prepared for that. We've been doing this for 5 years now, so we've got some lessons learnt, and I'd really love to share those with you today. The final, one of my P's, got to have some alliteration to get things moving, is pragmatism. So, you know, we have had some criticism around the level of effort, I guess, we place on getting some of these vacant properties up to a condition that we consider safe for women and children to be housed. What I would say is the alternative is not palatable. So, you know, the walk along the banks of the river this morning and through the small tent cities, when there's vacant properties sitting behind us, and yes, the construction is happening, we know it's happening, but it happens at a pace that's never fast enough. So there is a pragmatic solution here, and we need to take those opportunities where they present themselves. I'm going to go back to people, but I'm not talking about our clients. I also want to acknowledge, I've got team members here, Maddie Neely and Sue Cripps, and back in New South Wales, hi folks, Janet, Zanny, Dawn, and Adele. It takes a team. So this is the typical model you'll see from a crisis delivery service. Might be called a specialist homelessness service, depending on where you're offering services in the state or nationally. And you'll see that there is that transition from a point of crisis to a period of safety and shelter, critically with the delivery of tailored casework support from professionals who are working with a family to move them through trauma. With, you know, the golden egg at the end of it all, which is the permanent housing objective. As I mentioned, that is incredibly difficult, and we've heard throughout most presentations over the course of this conference, although there's a lot of optimism, it's probably the best conference I've gone to of recent times for that reason, but you know, we still are dealing with a dysfunctional system of low vacancy rates and a lack of sufficient social and affordable housing. So by very need, we needed to find that interim strategy, which is transitional housing in some places, medium-term housing in others, and for us it really describes our meanwhile use program. Here it talks about 12 to 18 months accommodation. Not necessarily. Like the presentation you heard previous to this, we're focused on people. So the journey of each individual woman or the family is what we consider, and where we're working with properties that are available for a specific period of time, then you're working strategically with the pop-up and pop-down around that as well. Oh, my green button is not working, team. Thank you. Okay, and this is my pragmatic response. So this slide, and I know I'm going to talk you through three very just clear lines. Don't even worry about the data points along, they're just tracking over time. But what it shows you here is the green line at the top is the number of, the percentage of the women and kids that we support who were able to move into permanent accommodation. So that's a secure private rental property, 40%. The yellowy line down below bumps between 11 and 10 of recent years, and that's our social housing exits. So these are the people that we've worked with that we know reliably, solidly at the end of our time. We're finding them the security of that accommodation. We have in the middle of that 40% of people who are still in insecure housing. And again, that's not a feature of the way in which we're doing our work, the level of support and effort that is going into assisting those families. It's about the absence of the options for alternate accommodation. And so for as long as we have that middle line, or we have that gap in the middle for the opportunities to house people, we need pragmatic solutions like meanwhile use. And we'll continue to focus our efforts in delivering those in ways that we can. And let me tell you about that. Yeah, next slide, thanks. So this was our entry into our meanwhile use program. And it is the real property, but I won't, and I will share some stories from the women who have stayed with us. I'll show you real properties, but not real people, if you get my meaning. This property, a 3-bedroom residential, fibro, nice big garden out the back, very standard Western Sydney property for any of you who know New South Wales. It was part of a larger master plan development. So this property, along with 7 others that we had access to as part of this partnership, were made available to us initially for 3 years, but we actually still are using that property, and we're now at year 5. So planning system, thank you, in some components. And the way in which this property came to us was through the developer who had supported some of the work we were doing in establishing a new crisis shelter. They were involved in that because they have social value that they're trying to exercise and connection to community. And that was an opportunity for them, and that sparked a conversation about the needs of the women in our services and how they might assist. Over a period, actually it took 12 months, we started to identify the pieces of the puzzle around what they could offer, what we as support providers could offer, and what gap remained, which was someone to manage the tenancy in the property. Women's community shelters have just gained our Tier 3 community housing registration. We're very glad to have done that, but we really believe in the value of a sophisticated, responsive community housing sector to partner with, to be able to manage the property, manage the tenancy, and get to know the tenants, so you open up that pathway to next opportunities. So our founding partner for this project was Bridge Housing, and here you can see a tripartite model is how we framed this legally initially. The tripartite agreement was an adaptation of Bridge's head lease agreement, and what it did was really clearly spelled out the responsibilities of each of the parties to this project. Bridge Housing would manage the sign-ups and the assessment of rents, yes, the social housing rent, and yes, the CRA application where possible. We used initially occupancy agreements rather than tenancy agreements, and I can talk through the benefits and risks of both of those approaches. It also meant that for PACE, I guess, who were concerned that reputationally there might be a risk to them at the time that they needed to pop down the project, that, you know, community would know that something was being withdrawn, but they were a party that was kind of, you know, in the background, landowner, property owner, but front-facing was Women's Community Shelters, our partners, and Bridge Housing. Our role was to continue to provide support to the families that were housed and work with them to ensure that we were moving on to, you know, next steps in their journey. The way in which that partnership really landed is really nicely captured by one of our residents. I'm going to call her Faith, an Ethiopian woman with two children, one beginning high school, the other in primary school. She married an Australian man and was sponsored to come to Australia through that relationship. That relationship became violent and unsafe for her and broke down. She lost that sponsorship right and was moved to a bridging visa. While the bridging visa gave her a right to work for 20 hours a week, there was absolutely no way that she was going to be able to house a family, let alone pay for childcare and the other elements that you need to if you're a working woman, accessing the types of roles that she was looking at that time. We got to know her because she was in one of our crisis accommodation services. One of the things that happens for women without any income, who are also not eligible for social housing because they don't have Australian citizenship, is that they stay in crisis while other families come and go. So some crisis services will have women without income in crisis accommodation for up to 12 months plus, while their visa situation is resolved. For Faith, she was moved into this property. It became her home. We assisted her to connect her kids to school. The developer, you've got to remember there's a master plan site, so they had offices at the back of these properties, you know, with a big construction site and other things going on. They needed a food van, a coffee van. They had a program called the Kickstart program that was offering traineeships. A really lovely connection happened where Faith worked there, got a traineeship, got some sponsorship for her kids to access childcare through a period of, would have been over 18 months. That family has permanent residency. More than that, they have the really strong feeling that a community supported them, made them feel valued and welcome, and like they had a place. So the partnership here meant that, you know, Bridge, although they've got, you know, systems that calculate tenant income and do all of those things, set a $5 a week rent. So there was some payment, utilities on top of that, but we were working with that family to be able to improve what she could contribute back to the country that she's now living in, and you know, repair from her experience to that point. Where we are now, yes, next slide please, thank you. This is us 5 years later. So the number of partners you can see there. have grown quite significantly. And they've grown in every area. So Women's Community Shelters is part of a network of community shelters. We have involved our local shelter network in our meanwhile use housing projects as those opportunities have arisen, because they are locally based. If there's been an opportunity that's located near to them, then like our Northern Beaches service, they deliver the casework support, and there's a connection between the crisis and the transitional housing. In terms of our community housing partners, the same thing. So we, in New South Wales, we have community housing partners really connected to areas in their local communities, and that's where we would go to start to expand what was available, because they were also going to be the partner most able to provide the support upon exit. And I'm really proud of the work of the team, just in terms of what you see here in the scope of the number of partners and the scale of what's on offer. And I'm going to show you that because I think you need the visuals. But we have, single units right through to aged care, vacant aged care facilities. The things, I guess, about this that are foundational and made it easy to replicate are having options around the legal agreements. The tripartite agreement was good for some partners. Others wanted a head lease agreement with the CHP and a partnership agreement with us as support provider. We were so flexible, about what worked in different settings. And I recommend with all of this that the pragmatism, really shows itself here. If someone is coming to you saying, I have a property that I want to make available to you, you kind of go, okay, how are we going to do that? And work with the parameters that you can. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, so this property here that you can see was our first multi-room property, I guess. So we've done independent, cottages, standard homes, family homes. This property was an underutilised, disused at the time, actually, if I'm honest, aged care facility. It was owned by Twilight Aged Care, which is a provider on mainly Sydney's northern suburbs. We were invited to go and have a look at the site because a guy who was doing the planning work for Twilight to get it, start the planning process to have this property refurbished to become individual living units, had watched a documentary about a meanwhile use property in Victoria, I think. And so then just started ringing partners who he thought kind of had the right name and had a chat. I reached out to Link Wentworth and said, this has come up, it's in your hood, can we go and have a look together? Walked around a property which had the most magnificent gardens. I can't even tell you, so where properties are located, I couldn't agree more with the other speakers that the trauma repair value in having beautiful outside spaces, which many established properties do, really speaks volumes. This was a heritage garden, beautiful magnolias, camellias. The building itself had been a dementia facility, and it was old and very tired. It also had a particular smell, which I'll leave to your imaginations, but it had been empty for 18 months. We left feeling overwhelmed, I can say, but still, and I go back to that, the missing middle and the families that are otherwise in crisis, and we just kept that that little buzz that you get in your belly where you just think, I think I can. And serendipitously, we got a phone call from a partner who was helping a five-star hotel move out several levels of furniture. And they were saying, we either take this to, we take it to a tip, or we put it in an alternate property, and we're like, okay, well, that's telling us something. You know, too many things are starting to come together. This was an enormous project. It probably took about, it was absolutely 6 months to get it up. This is all happening outside of any government funding. So our model operates so long as the property doesn't have a rent attached from the owner. And if we're able to get philanthropic support in and community support to get the property at a condition that is livable and a safe, good quality housing solution, we're not talking about substandard accommodation by any means, then the financial model can deliver. It can deliver a casework support for a 0.5 FTE, half time a week, and it can pay some of the tenancy management costs of the community housing provider. If you get left field maintenance issues, then things start to get trickier, and it does require that both organisations tip in their management kind of overheads. This particular property, as I mentioned, aged care, so it was available for women over 55, resolved the planning issues because it had a hostel consent. Perfect, no issue there. It just meant that there was no barrier and we could activate the project really quickly. And because we'd done it once, everyone believed in us and thought we could do it again. And I feel like we absolutely got better with every iteration. So this is Mossman House, also owned by Twilight Aged Care, also a partnership with Link Wentworth. Our Northern Beaches Women's Shelter undertake the casework at this particular site. And you can see just how we're starting to really lift up the quality of the experience. And that's because we were able to get the support of Temple & Webster. Anyone who's shopped online for furnishings will have come across them. They've been the most phenomenal partner. And we really, through them and with their support, have been able to set a standard around the quality of accommodation. This is a beautiful property. It was an old psychiatric hospital. It is absolutely imperative for us that any of these institutional spaces don't feel like institutions. They have to feel like homes. So we go into them and the first question is, how can we soften this space? How do we take what would have been check-in and check-out areas and make them lounge rooms and sitting areas and reflection areas? And that's been a really impressive piece of work with this property. The next property, and so we're now probably 3 years in on our journey, was right smack in the middle of COVID. And it was our first project where we commercialised, I guess, or started to talk to an owner who wanted a commercial return or a return. It was a subsidised return. So Scape is a provider of student accommodation. In fact, I think they also offer accommodation in Brisbane. So there were lessons learned through COVID that we reflected on and thought about how we might apply differently in this particular location. We had this property only for 12 months. It did need a return to the owner. That was subsidised on their account because the alternative for them was that they were empty, but they needed to have some return. And we had the support of the local government, City of Sydney, also provided a grant that sat behind this that really just subsidised the rental costs to make the model stack up. The rooms look new, beautiful on the slides. They're very small. Student accommodation, these were kind of 18 square metres, and amenity is really important. In our other properties, and the benefit of the older properties in the aged care sites, we gave women 2 rooms each, so they'd have a bedroom and a sitting or an other room. Where we could, women had their own bathrooms. Occasionally those were shared, and kitchen areas were shared. This was all inclusive, but you couldn't roll out a yoga mat, which is kind of my, where's the yoga mat go question. So they were small. It restricted our ability to provide casework because there were communal spaces because it was set up for students who wanted to be communal, but our women didn't really want to be communal, and COVID was still kind of a scary place to be. This partnership was with City West Housing. Again, they looked at ways that they could facilitate some of the women here into other housing options. The other thing actually about that project, the 12 months. 12 months is like right at the edge of what's possible by the time you stand something up and then look at effectively supporting women to move elsewhere. We didn't have to do any work, obviously, to that particular site. The benefits of the location, again, no planning issues because it was set up to operate in that way. Women was catered for younger women, and it really did enable some younger women to stay connected to education during that period when they otherwise may not have. But it was a really hard job for staff to feel like at the end of it that we had effectively supported all women into wherever they were going to be accommodated next. So this is where we are 5 years on, just geographically the spread, and the tiny little cluster of 7 is where we started. Now there are properties across New South Wales and the Central Coast. I think I've missed one. I have to go back. Yes, sorry, I can't miss this out. I can't miss it out because the stories of the women are really important, but also the housing providers and the work that they've done is really important too. And this one came to us via, I guess, the housing provider knowing about the work we did. So Alloa House is on the New South Wales Central Coast. Again, a disused aged care facility, but actually a much newer building that had been sold to a private developer. The private developer had plans, but they were a bit future focused, so there was some time. They were an individual that was connected to the local community and wanted to give back and felt really strongly about, and also I guess had that impetus to find a way to insure their property that was otherwise going to be vacant, and all of those challenging things. So there are absolutely benefits for landowners and property owners in here because of what they're able to do in insuring properties and making sure that they're safe because people are seeing them and they're not going to go, to ill repair. The project with Alloa House, this houses 14 women. We have already, in just over 12 months, seen 9 women transition into permanent accommodation, 7 into social housing and 2 into residential aged care. This project was a really interesting one because of the demographics of the Central Coast, which has a lot of older women and a lot of older women who are alone and vulnerable in their housing situation. There is a lovely story with this project of a woman who was in her early 80s. It's lovely because of where it ends, not so lovely with where it starts. She had lost her long-time partner and didn't have family, so very, very isolated and without superannuation or other financial means to lean back into. She found herself here through various referral pathways. She did have a chronic illness, which, as I mentioned, we don't have full-time staff on site. There are half a week that most, not, yeah, so 4 of 7 days there'll be a staff member who's available, but people need to typically be fairly independently functioning. The chronic illness took a bad turn and she had a fall and she was admitted to hospital. The remainder of the women at Alloa House rallied behind her, visited her in hospital, took her flowers. She was so filled up by the level of support and friendship that she requested to come back to Alloa House when she was released from hospital, which we did, and then we worked with her on a transition into an aged care space. But it was all done according to her needs and wishes and in a really respectful and as flexible a way as we could accommodate. You can see the Temple and Webster team there with their handy tools and other things. It's a perfect opportunity to get community in, and all of our projects rely on community support. This particular project with Pacific Link and Key2 Realty did require a small amount of government investment. It was a one-off $300,000 grant for the life of the project. We'll definitely have the property for 3 years, potentially longer, depending on planning. And it was the difference that let us just kickstart, get some works completed, and get the property tenanted until the tenancy meant that we were breaking even with the staffing costs. Okay, now I can move on. So in 5 years, we're almost at 100,000 bed nights through our meanwhile use programs. We've increased the supply of what Women's Community Shelters is able to offer in that medium term by 20%. The numbers do go up and down because things pop up and pop down. So here's the pitch. We do need a pipeline. If there is a property, and this is not just the responsibility of those of us sitting here, you know, government has a role to play in identifying opportunities. If you're an aged care provider with property and you know that it's partway through a development cycle, if you're a developer and maybe you land bank and maybe you don't, but maybe you know that there's infrastructure corridors where properties will be in this current market sitting vacant. There are ways in which we can make sure that people have a roof over their head by utilising those kind of opportunities. So I've talked through many of the success factors, I'd say. What I would say is what won't we consider? We so far haven't gone down the vacant land tiny home, but I think that's absolutely opportunity in that. Just hasn't been something we have pursued yet. Most often when people come with an opportunity in that scenario, it has a rental tag, like a price tag attached. So working out how without government subsidy you might make that stand up, I guess, is a question for us. The time frame is problematic. If you know, it's really got to be 2 years plus that a property is available to us. The property needs to be safe and secure and of a quality that you or I would feel comfortable living in, and we need to be able to make any property that has previously been an institution not feel like an institution, and really leverage the community that is around. So it's a balance around individual safety and community education and activism as part of this change, and as part of being able to respond to issues like homelessness and DV. Oh, we're going back again, see, I'm just too... Can I go to the last slide, please? Thank you. Too eager. I want to share this story with you. This is Sue. Oh, I'm losing my thing. Sue was a resident with us at Mossman House. Actually, you could probably find Sue's story on YouTube if you looked, because she did appear on the drum. She was really keen to share her story. At 65, Sue was unable to find accommodation that she could afford on the pension and thought that she would end up living in her car. She was interviewed for ABC's The Drum and asked how, after years of working in aged care and disability, she ended up living in transitional housing. So these are her words. Divorce. Divorce does it, doesn't it? You don't have much to begin with because you have time out to have children, so you don't build up super. You're always giving the kids money, giving to everybody, giving, and that's how you end up in this situation. I couldn't believe places like this existed. When I first came here, they said, go to the donations room. There's all these clothes and shampoos and things that women in our circumstances go, what, for us? I have to tell you, Sue chose from that donations room a pair of high heels with a 9-inch stack, I can't even tell you, and she put them up on her dresser, and yeah, I think whatever they symbolise for her, I was really happy that she had them. She says that experience for her was a beautiful message of, yeah, you're worth it. You're all worth it. And in the 4 months, I've made so much progress. I'm going to get a tattoo done that says, "Eat my fear." I'm one of the lucky ones. I'll get some money from my divorce settlement and get some accommodation, but even if I couldn't, WCS and Link are looking after me and looking after my friends here. But these places are so few, and we need more of them. So yeah, let's be opportunistic and find more of them, because they're out there, and special things can happen, and people, through partnerships, through pragmatism, can find a special place and facilitate change. And the properties might come and go, but the people and the partnerships that support us to get there, our housing partners, our community partners, the community that's been part of that journey, the impact for them, that continues. And that's really important to changing the current situation that we're all grappling with. Thanks.
Okay, we've got some questions, do we? If you'd just like to raise your hand. Oh, down the front.
Hi, I'm Anna Kate from the SA Housing Authority. I'm just wondering how you manage congregate sites with congregate facilities with the limited staffing, because we've had a lot of aged care sites come up and our hesitation has always been about, you know, interpersonal conflict, safety,
Yes.
and the like without the 24/7.
Yep. So I would say really good assessment processes in terms of understanding at intake the complexity of the women that you are accepting into that setting, which is not to say that women with a history of mental ill health or addiction are not considered, but you do have in mind who is in this property at this point in time, what are those personalities like. This has got to be a home. And we're working from the perspective of the staffing that is available. There is a network behind that individual, so it's not a lone staff member. There certainly is a 24/7 available should there be an incident on site or something like that. There's also a need to really clearly have that delineated responsibility between women's community shelters as a support provider, the community housing provider, in terms of is it disquiet because there's a maintenance issue or an issue that can be resolved through an asset approach, or do we need to have a house meeting and get to the bottom of this? And I guess having a backbone organisation that's able to step in and predict or get a sense for when there's periods where more support is needed, having that flexibility to do that is really important. These women have been through our crisis services first. I know there are some models where it's direct into accommodation. There's definitely, they haven't all, but some older women are referred directly, or the property is in fact advertised, so it's kind of private. The opportunity is public, and so that's where the assessments are important. So with the higher level needs, I would say we often know the families or the women. Then we're doing a really solid intake, and we've got processes on the ground, both through the casework and the meetings, and being able to ramp up support if we need it. Does that help? Also, I couldn't, enough meetings, enough communal space for people to be able to get away, or meet but then go back to their rooms, enough kitchen and cooking spaces if those aren't in rooms, and enough space, I think the value of having the 2 rooms for those women, so there was a room to sleep in and there was a room to have people come and have a cup of tea in, or all of those things. I think we often feel a responsibility to say, there's 43 rooms here, I must have each of these occupied. And I would say, in terms of that congregate setting, no, because you're looking for harmony. And our sweet spot, I would say, is probably about 16 women. In the accommodation where we've gone up to 18, it's interesting that yes, we'd probably need more support. So at a point in time where we've had women leave, we tend just to then try and hold it at around the 16.
Hi,
Hi, my name's Orla Matthews from the Adelaide Northwest Homelessness Alliance. I'm just really interested in the funding for capital works and for staffing at scale without exhausting your partnerships and your in-kind
Yes.
philanthropy donations.
Great question. We have a lot of respect for Temple and Webster, and we work really hard to manage that partnership. And we really seek to give back as much as we can to our partners. So I have a manager of partnership and communications, and she really fosters those relationships and makes sure that that's a really positive experience for partners. Our partners shouldn't feel like they're being bled dry and that the reliance is, never ending. We don't assume that the partnership will be there. So as much as possible, we give back in ways like speaking at International Women's Day events or during 16 days of activism. We give back as an organisation as much as we can in ways that they support staff within our partner organisations. The other thing I would say is because our model is located in communities, we're also activating the community in that location as the property becomes available. So we're not seeking, so our partner at Beecroft House, National Projects and Maintenance, they've just done that project. We haven't asked them to do every project. At Mossman House, it was A.W. Edwards. And again, we go and talk to them, we talk about what's required, they'll have a look at the property, give us a sense of what they can offer. And yeah, you have to build all of that, I guess, into the feasibility of the project. And we have, in fact, visited sites where we just weren't sure how we would make it work. And you've got to be prepared to just go, well, I don't want to burn any partnerships by taking on something that's not feasible unless there's going to be solid funding behind it. Does that help?
Okay, do we have any more questions? Ooh, I didn't have to go far there.
Hi, Sally from Churches of Christ in Queensland. You mentioned, and I'm very intrigued by this, that management is self-supported by the organisation. How do you make that work? Because a lot of work at management level goes into setting up these partnerships and such like. And is there a scale that you need to get to? I'm just curious to know.
Look, that's a really good question, and it's probably very specific to our organisation. We were founded with a philanthropy-based model. So although we have secured government funding that is channelled through to the crisis shelters that operate, we've very intentionally kept the WCS hub, we call it, philanthropically and funded through donations. And the scale is such that, 11 years ago, there was a team of 4 of us and 3 crisis shelters. And now there is a team of 20. They're all, not all full-time, but activated across philanthropic engagement, community and advocacy work and community activation. Because our theory of change is that we work with communities to make stuff happen, and communities need to buy into that, but it doesn't let government off the hook. Government also needs to be a supportive force, but we don't expect that it is just government or just philanthropy. It is a combination.
Any more questions? Francis, do we have any online? Nope. Okay, thanks, Simone. If we can put a round of applause for Simone.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah.
And a really great example of how you're using meanwhile use properties to be able to increase the support of women in crisis across New South Wales. So we've come to that time now that, it's a very sad ending. That's the end of our think tank session. So on behalf of Ahuri and Civica, I'd like to thank you for your attendance and hope to see you in 2 years' time. We will have lunch downstairs on the one level down on the mezzanine level. And then there'll be the plenary session after lunch this afternoon. So again, thanks for your attendance. If we can just have one big round of applause for all our presenters for today. Thanks again. Have a great day.